Explaining Chinese sentiments towards multilateralism. I am interested in the effect of global connectedness, the idea that we are all globally working towards a better future. This can only be accomplished given the fractured nature of the world we live in through multilateral activity of many nations attempting to solve problems like that of world hunger, seen articulated in the UN's development projects like the Millennium Development Goals. Now, more than ever, public opinion plays a large role in the shaping of policy decisions. It seems that overwhelming apathy has lately characterized Western attitudes towards multilateral activity for global goods. I thought it would be interesting to investigate Chinese attitudes in light of their isolated, underdeveloped history, combined with their recent spurt of economic growth. The dataset I used was the Chicago Council on Global Affairs' Public Opinion Survey, China Codebook. The sample size was 2,000 respondents. To measure the importance of multilateral goods to respondents, I computed an index comprising the importance of protecting weaker nations, combating international terrorism, securing adequate supplies of energy, improving the global environment, preventing the spread of nuclear weapons, and combating world hunger. These questions measure the importance of global altruism to respondents, a global altruism which cannot be realized by just one party and involves many parties in a multilateral effort. Answers came on a scale of importance from 1, not very important, to 3, very important. Before I built my index, I ran a reliability test, which showed that my dependent variable is a coherent index and all questions measured a similar idea. The alpha score was sufficiently high, at 0.69. I could not improve it significantly by deleting any of the components. The independent variables I used were concern about security, how threatened people felt by aspects of their lives, support for economic institutions, how positively people felt towards neoliberal organizations, age measured in 7 groups, and gender, coded as a demi-variable for maleness. To measure security concerns and economic institutional support, I created indices which had significant alpha scores of above 0.6. I hypothesized that level of concern about security would be a marker for stability, that those who considered themselves to be highly insecure would be more likely to support multilateralism because it would effectively address their globalized security concerns. Eichenberg argues that multilateral actions are more favorable to those with increased security concerns because they require consensus and thought-out decision-making, making those who already feel insecure less threatened by taking action. My second hypothesis was that support for neoliberal economic institutions would lead strongly to support for multilateral action. Milner and Tingley, in studying public opinion on multilateralism around foreign aid in the United States, found that respondents would be much more likely to prefer multilateralism where their preferences for aid policy differed less from those of the international institution. That is, that the values of the multilateral organizations would be involved in carrying out these global goods would match up with those of their respondents. I assumed that as the majority of multilateral organizations belonged to the same ideology as the World Bank, IMF, and WTO, respondents who had supported them would be also likely to support actions that improve a globalized world. I further hypothesized that age would be positively associated with support for multilateral goods. Tang observes that age is positively associated with political attention, indicating that those who are older would be more interested in global activity like multilateral goods. My fourth hypothesis was that men would be less likely to support multilateralism in concert with the studies of Eichenberg and others, because women are more liberal in political orientation and men are more conservative or realist. I ran a correlation matrix which indicated that all the variables correlated with support for multilateral goods. All the correlations with multilateralism were statistically significant, having a p-value of less than 0.05. Age and male correlated with multilateralism as well as the independent variables, suggesting that I should control for them. The first regression analysis I ran included concern about security and support for global economic institutions. This initial model indicated that both variables are significant, however, concern about security is a fairly strong relationship between 0.2 and 0.3. While support for economic institutions isn't nearly as strong. The standardized beta shows concerns about security had a far stronger effect on multilateralism, having a value of 0.38 to security's 0.11. My second regression analysis included the 2 control variables of age and gender and showed that they are both significant predictors. If you are older and female, you are much more supportive of multilateral goods. Being male had a strong negative effect on one's support. This model improved slightly after the inclusion of these variables. The R-squared increased from 0.169 to 0.186. Security concerns remain the most important variable even over age and gender. They didn't affect the effect of security concerns and support for institutions on support for multilateral goods. Overall, all my variables were statistically significant, with p-values of much less than 0.01. Multilateral regression changed very little from the correlation matrix, suggesting that the variables I controlled for were not the ones affecting security concerns and support for global institutions. There was a very high number of missing cases, dropping the survey size from 2,000 to around 900 responses, and throwing the viability of the results into doubt. Tolerance levels gave me no indication of problems of multicollinearity. My first hypothesis was that stronger security concerns would lead to increased support for multilateral goods. This was proved correct by my findings, providing the strongest results, and seems to correlate with Eichenberg's findings that women, who are generally more concerned about security, were also more supportive of multilateral action. However, even controlling for gender, security remained a strong factor. It seems that those who feel insecure might think that this globalized sense of insecurity can be solved through multilateral goods and would thus support multilateral action to end their security threats. It is also possible that there is a third factor involved, causing both insecurity and a desire for multilateral action. More research would be required to identify and isolate it. My second hypothesis was that stronger support for global economic institutions would lead to increased support for multilateral goods. While I was correct in postulating a positive effect, it was very weak. It is possible that my hypothesis's assumption that the core beliefs underlying one's support for global institutions are not the same factors involved in generating one's support for multilateral goods. That is, that people who are supportive of the WTO, IMF, and World Bank do not feel that solving global hunger, for example, is an important part of their lives. It is thus possible that there is a third factor present here also. My third hypothesis, that increased age would lead to increased support for multilateralism, was also supported. It was fairly strong when other variables were controlled, indicating that there might be significant pressures on youth, preventing them from believing in multilateral goods. Perhaps cynicism and apathy about the global system that seems pervasive amongst younger generations, linked to global economic pressures that have defined their thoughts. My fourth hypothesis, that men would be less likely to support multilateral goods, was also supported with strong results. Men were much less likely to support multilateral goods than women. This indicates that men are much more conservative as far as multilateral conceptions of goods go. This might, like age, be linked to economic pressures that affect men disproportionately. The topic of my research was interesting and I feel important in an increasingly globalized world. However, I was limited by the dataset and research available to me. A targeted study would be beneficial, particularly one that could guarantee higher participation levels so that the sample size would be large enough to make reasonable claims. It would further be beneficial to compare Chinese results to results in other countries to see what the impact of security concerns might be in a global context. If awareness about security threats is really the key to multilateral organizations' success, awareness might be the pressure required to generate appropriate effectiveness of global institutions.